Hi everyone, hope you had a great Christmas. Looking forward to the new year. As is usual at this time of year, I get myself a copy of the World Radio and TV Handbook for Christmas. This year's no different, 2024 edition. So a lot of you will know that the publishers changed for the 2023 edition last year. Prior to 2023, the publishers were actually based in Summertown in Oxford, not that far away from me, but they decided to pull the plug, citing issues with a reduction in the local knowledge that they relied upon around the world. Those distant stations in South America that some of us can sometimes copy. The only way to know whether a particular station that hasn't been heard for a while in another continent is still transmitting, still on air, is by using information from those that live much closer by. Apparently this large group of contributors have been sort of dying off with old age and what have you, maybe a general reduction in interest in doing this. And they basically did it for free. I think the situation used to be that if you were a contributor, you did it basically for a free copy of the book. But anyway, the publishers decided to pull the plug, and the guys at Radio Data Center in Germany took over for the 2023 edition, which is very similar in format. Apparently there were some issues with layout and accuracy of some of the information, but I think we can forgive those guys given it was their first attempt. They've taken the constructive criticism on board, and here we are with the 2024 edition. I'm just going to run through it quickly, just so that you guys can see what the content is. And for those of you that haven't bought it yet, I would encourage you to do so. I know it's not particularly cheap, but the World Radio TV Handbook's been around since 1947, and for many years has been regarded as the one source of or reference for radio transmitter information that is nearly always accurate. I don't think I've ever found anything in this book that's actually been incorrect. And that's been the case for many years. It originally started as the World Radio Handbook in 47, and then a few years later started including TV transmission information. They didn't actually change the name from WRH to WRTH until the 1960s apparently, but for many years the format has basically remained the same. There's one change here that is actually a really nice touch, which I'll come on to. So, advertisement for the new Perseus 22. So Micro Telecom and ELAD have joined forces to reimagine, re-engineer the Perseus. I had the original version of that SDR, and it absolutely one of the best SDRs of all time, maybe the best. But there's an advertisement for the new version. Right, editorial from Gunther and Oliver, just welcoming readers and the usual blurb, making the note actually, or making the point that they did take the criticism on board from the 2023 edition, and that's actually inspired them to try even harder with the 2024 edition. And then there's a piece on a couple of contributors. There's Joachim Vekstrom, who's a young guy, 16 years old, from Finland. It's really inspiring to read his interest in radio for such a young guy. And then obviously the very well-known Glenn Hauser writes a piece on his experiences in radio from when he was a young child. So Hall of Fame. So a review of the Perseus 22 by Ralph Menn, which is very interesting. And, for those of us that use SDRs, given the almost legendary status of the original version, the Perseus 22 has got to be on people's radar for sure. Then there's a piece on software-defined radio for beginners, the RTL SDR. That's how I started with the Newelec, which is also interesting. A review on the receivers that are based on the TEF 6686 chip, which I don't know very much about, but they look a bit similar in terms of how they've been put together to the original sort of Malahite. Obviously not a high volume sort of production product, but another interesting review. Advertisement for the Megaloop FX. I've got one of these. Very, very good antenna, and probably something that may also be on more people's radars now that Wellbrook have shut down. The usual receiver guide for HF for 2024, various Texans in there, SDR Play, AOR, the Belka DX is in there. So that's interesting, with some pricing for the North America, Europe, etc., UK. Then a piece on public broadcasting in Mexico over the last 100 years by Radio Educación, which are a station that I can sometimes copy on 6185 kilohertz. Another piece on Nauru, so that's a tiny island which is northwest of the Solomon Islands, on a history of their radio on the island with support from Australia, which is quite interesting. This is really interesting by Dan Robinson, who I sort of know online at least. He's written a piece on the sort of the situation on HF, on shortwave across the world for 2024, and that's really interesting. There are some stations that I had assumed that are closed down, which have definitely closed down. Dan covers those, but he also covers those stations that remain on air, like Vietnam, CRI, etc. So that's a really interesting read if you want a sort of brief update on the state of shortwave this year. And another piece he's written on the wild world of premium receiver collections. Dan is well known for owning some really high-end receivers, the Raycall RA3712, and the really high-end JRCs, the NRD 93, the 301A, the 630, etc. That's really interesting. These are these were really expensive, but with the reduction in transmissions on shortwave, and the sort of general decline of shortwave, these really high-end receivers are becoming a little bit more obtainable in terms of cost. Another interesting article on non-directional beacon DXing by Michael, I guess that's pronounced Oexner, but that's a really interesting article. And also a piece of software, PSKOVNDB is a piece of software I think that will actually, you can use to help identify the CW, the Morse signals from NDB. So that was an interesting part of that article. The K9AY remote antenna system that I know nothing about, but another piece on that. And then two pieces that are regulars. So the HF broadcasting conditions expected during 2024. The current solar cycle is predicted to peak between sort of January and October this year. So we'll see if that happens. And then the suitable frequencies matrix. So this is basically a matrix whereby you take your location, the transmitter location, and it will give you or suggest the appropriate band upon which you're most likely to hear that station. So that's been in this book for many years and is very useful. Briefly, how to use a WRTH, and then a couple of pages on the sort of on those organisations that partner with the WRTH, so the British DX Club, etc. And then the various maps of the world with the main transmit sites, so Ottawa, Toronto for Canada, etc., Calgary, and then in North America, Red Lion, Lebanon, Nashville, and same applies for South America. See Baleine, Radio Club de Para, Europe, Africa. You can see here there's Pinheira, Sao Tome and Principe, Asia, etc. And this is something that's been in the book for many years also. And then the world time zone map. I won't go into the sort of national radio, etc., because that's very much has always been. But what's interesting is when you get to the shortwave stations of the world. Right. So whereas last year I think there were like 16 or 17 pages of shortwave stations of the world, this year there are over 50. And the reason for that is that they've now included the transmission time. So here you can see for 3325 kilohertz, Voice of Indonesia, you've now got multiple lines here for the actual transmit times. So 10 to 11, Voice of Indonesia, 11 to 12. So it's got all the transmission times are now listed for all the stations by frequency. And when you, within this format, you end up with over 50 pages of shortwave stations. So it starts on page 692 and finishes on page 745. So over 50 pages of shortwave station information starting at 2310 kilohertz shortwave Australia, all the way through to the BBC World Service on 25.9 megahertz. That's a really nice touch because it encapsulates everything. So yeah, everything's included here for every station on every frequency with all of the transmit times. How that stays, I mean, presumably that's only going to sort of stay relevant for 6 months because some of these transmission times do change, but nevertheless quite a nice touch. And then very quickly, if we go to medium wave by region for Europe, Africa and the Middle East, look at long wave 153, Algeria chain 1, antenna Satilor 162, the Aloise time signal, Medi 1, Nador 171, Iceland, that's going to close this year probably, BBC Radio 4 198 is going to close. This 207 AM Italia, oh, it says inactive. I know nothing about that. Polski Radio 225, DR Langbolge, Kaulenborg is going to shut down at the end of this month. So very little on long wave left. And if we go to Asia and the Pacific, actually East, yeah. So then you've got 164, 209 and 227, Mongolia. That's it for long wave. That's the state of long wave in 2024. So that's basically it. There's a geographical area codes used in the WRTH country index, summary of the abbreviations and symbols, international transmitter sites. Not sure if that's new or not. And then clubs and publications for DXs. So yeah, there you go. And that's it for 2024. I'm really grateful that these guys are still going. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is probably, I think this is the only print media remaining for our hobby, for DXing, shortwave listening, etc. And if I'm honest, you know, I'm going to keep buying this book while it's still being published. And I would suggest that for those of you that can afford it, you do it. You do the same and you buy it. You know, we're lucky that we have this reference to support our brilliant hobby, and you know, ultimately, if we don't buy it, they'll stop. You know, they'll stop, and we don't want that. So that's just my point of view. Anyway, so if you haven't already got it, if you can, go out and buy this reference. It's the ultimate reference for shortwave listeners, radio listeners in general, and highly recommended by me. Anyway, that's that. I wish you all a great new year, great DX, and catch you again soon on the channel. Thanks very much, and 73.